Hello and welcome to Leaders in Medicine. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Aidan Halligan. Aidan is the Director of Education at UCLH NHS Foundation Trust, and he's also Chief of Patient Safety at Brighton University's hospitals. Aidan, pleasure to see you here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Jean.
We always start this series with the same question, and that is, how did you become a doctor? What made you decide to embark upon medicine as a career?
Initially I wanted to become a priest.
Yeah.
And when I left school I joined a seminary for a year. I was the eldest of six, and I had a great year. I learned to play rugby and soccer really, really well, and I did some very interesting work that I hadn't anticipated doing. But I found at the end of the year that pastoral care was just too frustrating for me. I had to do something physical, and I had to feel I could make an actual difference. I was probably too young. I was too young, but I became very clear that I wanted to help people, but in a tangible way. And then I didn't go to medical school immediately. I worked at several things because I needed to put myself through college. And I started medicine at 21. And had a wonderful time in Trinity College in Dublin, and ended up failing my finals. And the interesting thing was that when I failed my finals, I was one of 5 out of the entire class who failed. And it was a big shock to me.
Had you ever failed anything before?
I had failed lots of times, but I'd always compensated. And the consequences of failure before had always been salvageable. But at this occasion, all my friends, people I had known intimately for 7 years, went on to become interns, and I was 6 months behind. And the sense of being excluded and dispossessed from a peer group was enormous. And I was in denial about it. I just felt very frustrated. And I remember a registrar who was quite a charming and talented man, a bit too clever for his own good as far as we were concerned, but an excellent doctor. I remember one day he said, listen, he said, you've got to take this seriously. If you want to pass on the repeats, you've got to get over the fact you failed and grow up. And actually from that moment, I had no problem. Did exceptionally well in the repeats, which never really count. And from the moment I held a bleep as an intern the following January, I loved being a doctor. Absolutely loved the patient care.
Was there anything before you started medicine that made you focus on medicine, or did it just seem, a sort of continuation of the caring sort of culture that you started off in the priesthood with? Yeah,
I was put in charge of a sheltered accommodation in Dublin. It was a no-go area for the police, and we got all sorts of street workers, sailors. There was always a fight. I learned to handle fights really well in that place, and without getting involved. But I found people who had absolutely horrendous life stories, many of whom were professional. I'll never forget the first time I came across an architect who had walked away from his family because of drink, and had left his children, his career, his wife, everything that had made him what he was in his mid-50s, and was homeless. And it was a real wake-up call. And what that man needed more than anything else was someone to spend time with him, to listen to him, and actually on occasion to hold his hand. And until we could do that, any medical care that we were going to give wouldn't have been effective. That always stayed with me. I saw a lot of people when I was very young who should never have been in the position they were later on in life, and it never fully got through to me how that could happen when someone started off with so much promise. And I did see that these people trusted doctors in a way that no one else in society did. The medical profession has a hugely important role as a model in society and in the fabric of our society. And I aspired to contributing to that.
It's interesting you spoke about the registrar who gave you the bit of advice. And I wonder if he ever knew the influence that his role modelling and his mentorship really has had in over such a long time, you know, that you can remember back now as the point where things turned around for you?
Well, he did. I was subsequently, I've had all sorts of jobs in my life, but I was subsequently appointed as Chief Executive of the Irish Health Service. And I met him not long after it was announced in the newspapers. And he was very proper and correct and respectful and all that. But I took him aside and I said, I explained to him what he'd done. He'd forgotten the moment, completely forgot it, didn't know it'd make the impact. And actually, I've had moments like that in my life, I'm sure you have it as well, Jean, where you said something that at the time seemed of trivial importance, but had a huge and disproportionate impact on the way people saw themselves and how they progressed. It really does emphasize to me that we should be completely aware of our impact in every conversation and everything we do.
Now, you've had somewhat a portfolio career, something that's very much in the news just now. Have you any advice to people who don't see themselves as being able to settle to, you know, a standard, you might say a 9 to 5 or 24/7 doctor's job?
Yeah, I love the patient care. There was nothing more gratifying than and I had a nice bedside manner. So in obstetrics, it was just hugely satisfying. But I needed something more than that, and I needed a challenge. And once I'd overcompensated for my failing of my finals and become a professor a couple of times, it just didn't seem to do it for me. So I needed a challenge. And the important thing for me in my life is that every day I come into work enjoying what I do. I manage out the things that irritate me or that frustrate me or that waste my time responsibly. But I try to make sure that everything I'm doing challenges me and makes me think. I think where we're going with our careers are that medicine's changing faster than we can change ourselves. And experience, it's a funny thing, I remember someone saying to me about experience, they said it was making the same mistake with increasing confidence. Someone else said 20 years in the health service, for many people, is the same year repeated 20 times. And actually I have a cycle of 2.5 years, apparently. I've changed my job every 2.5 years for the past 16 years. Apart from this job, actually, I'm 3 years in it now. But that's evolving, actually, in an interesting way. But I have a cycle, and all of us have cycles. And when you run into trouble with your frustrations around your post, it's often because you haven't recognized that your cycle is tapping on your door. So I think you should really try, as long as you're able to do work that challenges you in a constructive way and allows you to grow. And that's what I've tried to do.
Now, the big project we've got going at the moment here at UCL and UCL Partners is the Staff College. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, again, like lots of things in my life, it was serendipity, pure fortuitousness that allowed this. I was asked to go out to look at medical leadership in Afghanistan on one of my previous jobs. And when I went out with an expectation, I was completely overwhelmed in a very humble way by what I saw in the field. I saw NHS staff seconded into a war theatre under the most horrendous circumstances, behaving like doctors and nurses had always behaved in my mind's eye when I was motivated to become a doctor, in a war theatre. And the thing that completely confounded me was that the commanding officer of these consultant staff was a GP. Went against all my rules of hierarchy. And he led with a remarkable skill. And when I came back, I thought, we really should have something like this in the NHS. And so we've worked with the military and a large group of faculty over the past couple of years, and we've launched an NHS staff college across UCLP. And the objective of that is to enable a sharpening of the intellectual edge of very talented people so that we can tap into their vitality, their willingness to engage, to make them more vibrant and more capable at taking people to where they need to go, particularly at this moment when we've got a white paper that's about to be implemented that will be the equivalent of a war zone for the health service. And we need leaders.
Indeed, indeed. That's absolutely fascinating. It's been great to talk to you, Aidan. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jean.